Hi, everyone. Welcome to Data Ethics Professionals webinar number 6. Today, we are so lucky to have with us two people from the Arts Council England, and they're going to be talking to us about how they developed their responsible AI policy for their organization. So we're going to give it a couple minutes because I know people often sort of arrive a minute or two late, but I would love it if anyone is willing to introduce themselves in the chat. Just say where you're joining us from, what organization you're from, where you're based geographically. We always love to see who's joined us. We always love to see familiar faces from our data ethics professional program. So please say hi while we wait. I'll begin. My name is Kay. I work at the ODI. I deliver a lot of the data ethics training and data ethics consultancy that we do here at the ODI. And as part of this, I run a data ethics professionals qualification. So as you'll hear in a moment, Oonagh is one of our certified data ethics professionals and facilitators, which is sort of how we've connected in the first place. And I run these trainings and also deliver these webinars as part of it so that people can highlight the work that they've been doing since the time that they certified as data ethics professional. And we're hearing so many wonderful, interesting, and sort of ethically fascinating discussions on all sorts of issues. So please do join us for more. We'll have the links at the end of this session that will talk about what webinars we have coming up on a variety of topics. But for now, I just want to do a few little housekeeping things before we start. We have a chat, as you can see, lots of people introducing themselves. We love this. Please feel free to continue to post questions in there. I will keep an eye on it while Oonagh and Owen are delivering the content, and then I will curate those questions and ask them any of the questions that you've posed in the chat. Also watch it for themes of what you're finding interesting so that we can make sure that the discussion touches on those afterwards. There's also a dedicated Q&A box. So if you'd rather ask your question anonymously, you can do that. There's the facility to do that in the Q&A box. Obviously in the chat, it's going to say who posted the question. So you could do either one of those. I'll be keeping an eye on both. So as we've said, the webinar will be recorded. We'll be sharing it afterwards. You'll be able to sign up to our newsletter and get notified when it's posted that way. We've got a YouTube channel that you'll see it posted in, and you can always check on our website as well. Right, so today's speakers then, let me briefly introduce them. I'm sure they'll do a more thorough introduction of themselves when they get going. But we've got two people here with us today. It's extra exciting. I'm always happy when we have like sort of a little bit of a panel. So we've got Dr. Oonagh Murphy, who's a senior lecturer in digital culture and society at Goldsmiths, University of London. So Oonagh's based within the Institute for Creative and Cultural Entrepreneurship, where her research focuses on the scalability or emerging technologies for museums, galleries, and cultural organizations. So she'll tell us about how this role fits in with Arts Council England in a minute when she gets going. We've also got Owen Hopkin, who's the Director for New Technologies and Innovation at Arts Council England. And so he has a really strong background in a range of sort of technology and outreach around the arts and culture space, as well as being a professional musician. So you can all check out his album. Right. Over to you, Oonagh and Owen. I think this talk will probably be maybe about 20, 30 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So audience, please do feel free to keep adding those questions as they talk, and then we'll get to the questions at the end. I shall stop sharing so that you can share yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm presuming we can see slides. If not, yeah, you can jump in. Okay, I'm getting in.
Looks great.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for joining, everyone. Yeah, we're really excited to share what we've been working on for the last year or so now. So I guess by way of introduction, as Kay said, my name's Oonagh Murphy, and I'm currently working with Arts Council England as a Responsible AI Fellow. So that role is funded through the Arts and Humanities Research Council through a programme called BRAID, which stands for Bridging Responsible AI Divides. In this role, I've been providing expertise on the development and adoption of AI policies and practices to the Arts Council in an embedded researcher capacity. And this project really builds on my work on the impact of emerging technologies on culture and society, and more recently on responsible AI adoption in the cultural sector. So I'm really excited to share what we've been working on today. Much of the approach we've taken in this project with Arts Council is really premised on the skills I learned through the ODI Data Ethics Professional course. which I completed a few years ago. So it's nice to be able to share this project in this forum. I'm going to ask Owen if you want to introduce yourself at this point.
Thanks, Una. Hi there. Yeah, my name's Owen Hopkin. I'm the Director of New Technologies and Innovation at Arts Council England. Most of my role is involved in policy making around the use of new and emerging technologies by the cultural sector in both the creative and operational context. But I'm also the Director at Arts Council England that's been leading our AI work, which we're thrilled to talk to you about.
Cheers, Owen.
Una.
So before we dive into the presentation, it's probably worth noting that the work we're sharing today is also outlined in Responsible AI in Practice, which is a report that we published yesterday. You can access that on the Arts Council website, and I think the link will also be posted in the chat. Worth noting, the report probably goes into more detail than we have time to cover today. And we're really going to use this session to share some headline insights into the approach that we've taken over the last year. But I'd really encourage you to go and look at the report because it does provide a lot more depth and granularity in terms of how we've really operationalized this approach. And also, just I think in terms of context, when we were writing this report, we kind of wrote it with the public sector and cultural organizations as our target audience. So we know from speaking to other cultural organizations and also public sector bodies that a lot of organizations are really starting this journey and are starting to ask questions about what's the best approach. So we've really tried to be generous in sharing the approach and methodology that we have been taking, in part because lots of people were very generous with us, so we kind of wanted to pay it forward. So please do go and check out the report for more detail. Um, but now I'm going to pass back to Owen, who's going to give us a bit of context about who Arts Council England are and what they do.
Brilliant. Yeah. So Arts Council England is the national development agency for creativity and culture in England. We have around 700 staff and they're based in 9 offices. We invest public money from the government and the National Lottery to support the arts and culture sector, which also includes museums and libraries. Our ambition, which is set out in our strategy called Let's Create, is to ensure that everyone in England and Wales has access to high quality cultural experiences in the places where they live and work, and that creativity of all individuals is valued and nurtured. So, should we go to the next slide? So why is ACE thinking about AI? I'd say that Arts Council England's interest in AI has evolved over time. In 2018, we commissioned some research to explore the nascent uses of AI in the cultural sector, just to understand where and how or if it was being used. And also then since 2018, we've funded 210 projects to the tune of roughly £3.9 million. And that's allowed artists to experiment with AI tools in the creative process, provided training to help them understand how AI might extend the creative process, and then also funded standalone projects that have featured AI in some of the in some of the storytelling. But I think, like many people and organizations in the sector, and probably the world generally, there was definitely a step change in our interest when ChatGPT 3 launched in November 2022. And, that obviously prompted our interest in the big questions such as implications for intellectual property, environmental responsibility, but also then its potential for efficiencies or as a creative tool. So after that, we really started talking about needing to make progress on our AI work in 3 areas. The first was how we might understand the challenges and opportunities of using AI internally at ACE. The second was how we help the sector understand the challenges and opportunities. And then finally, how we can influence UK policy around the use of AI. And, it was roughly at that time, sort of March last year, that we found out we'd been successful in our Braid Fellowship application, which meant Oonagh arrived at Arts Council England as our Braid Fellow, and progress on, these 3 areas which are on the slide, accelerated enormously. So Oonagh, back to you.
Cheers, Owen. Yeah, so I guess kind of the starting point for this journey, this conversation at Arts Council was does Arts Council need an AI policy? Are staff interested in this? Is this something that's kind of on the horizon, or is this something that we need to address immediately? And so the first thing we did was we carried out a baseline study because we wanted to develop a strategy that really responded to an evidence base. So rather than being led by hype around, you need to use AI or AI is really important for your organization, we wanted to understand what actually AI meant for Arts Council at that moment, but also what staff felt might be the opportunity or some of the challenges going forward. And the headline figures were pretty powerful. Um, 55% of staff felt positive about the potential of these technologies, 22% negative. One of the real kind of headline figures for us was AI usage. 42% of respondents to the survey, so 110 staff members, told us that they were already using AI technologies in their work. That figure really kind of focused minds and showed that this wasn't a near future technology, but it was a technology that had already arrived at Arts Council. But we also saw a significant amount of interest. 80% of staff wanted to learn more about these technologies. Only 20% had engaged in training. 30% had received questions around the use of AI from the sector, but only 2% of staff felt that they had the skills or knowledge needed to be able to answer those questions. Overall, the baseline surveys told us that staff are unclear about what's an appropriate use of AI technologies in the course of their work. So this provided us with a really strong evidence base to create a custom approach to develop an AI strategy at the Arts Council. And I think for both the AI project team, but I think also for the executive board, the data from the survey evidence a need for policy in this area from a legal compliance and a reputational risk perspective. The survey made it clear that AI is not a near future technology. It is a technology that has already arrived at Arts Council England. So in order to respond to the emerging use of these technologies at Arts Council, we developed an AI strategy that allowed us to engage with some of the challenges that these technologies presented, but also provided the opportunity to think about where opportunities might be presented. The ultimate decision-making power around the adoption of an AI policy sits with the executive board. However, we knew from our own experience working in this area that digital transformation requires consultation, active listening, and co-production to ensure adoption is implemented across an organisation. So we knew to make that happen, we wanted to get staff on board from the very start of the project. We wanted staff to know that this was a research and development process. We weren't pushing AI, but we were responding to express needs and concerns raised by staff themselves. We also wanted staff to know that the policy would address existing practices and speak to emerging practices while also speaking to the values of the organisation. And we also crucially wanted staff to know that the approach we were taking was proactive rather than reactive. So to do this, to bring the organisation with us, we established two new forums. The first was the AI Oversight Group. This group was chaired by the Executive Director of Enterprise and Innovation. Members of this group were directors who represented the organisation from a variety of operational perspectives. And this group met quarterly. We saw this group as acting as a critical friend to work produced by the AI team. They were able to identify gaps and suggest ways to develop proposed policy and practice. And they served as a mechanism to refine work before it was taken to the executive board. So alongside this, we also had the Responsible AI Reference Group, or the Working Group. This was a group that I chaired, and members of it were staff from across Arts Council England, reflecting the full range of grades, locations, and directorates. And crucially, they were recruited to reflect the diversity of perspectives on AI, from those excited by the opportunity, to those who are neutral, to those that are vocally critical of these technologies. We designed this as a community of practice and a hierarchy-free space. We saw this as our place to sense check the approach to AI at Arts Council England. We wanted it to be a place to bring emerging questions and challenges to the group for discussion. We wanted it to be a critical and curious space to exchange ideas with invited external speakers from peer organisations to inspire and engage. And we wanted to bring voices from across the organisation into the conversation and support operationalisation and adoption of AI policy by feeding the work of the group back to members' own teams and colleagues for informal knowledge sharing. And this group met every 2 months. One of the most useful aspects of this group was that we invited those that were cynical or critical of these technologies. Some of those we asked to join the group were reluctant. They either felt they didn't have the skills or knowledge to contribute, or felt strongly that AI was bad for people and planet. So we did a lot of work engaging with these individuals to listen to their concerns and empower them to realise that their perspective was a valuable one that could help to shape the organisation's response to these technologies. We also discussed the motivation behind the wider AI project, responding to the emerging use of AI technologies by staff at Arts Council England, rather than a project that sought to push the technologies themselves. We advocated the benefits of a proactive approach to policy development, to share a culture of responsible AI, rather than waiting for something to happen. We sought to ensure that diverse voices are platformed in this meeting by holding a one-to-one session with members in advance when useful, sharing links to articles and podcasts that link to areas of people's personal interest or work, and programming guest speakers that speak to a range of perspectives and opinions. Our founding principle for this group was that a good meeting is one where everybody feels comfortable and confident contributing. We framed these calls as hierarchy-free space, something that we felt was important in a grade-focused organisation. And this allowed us to create a community of practice and a space for really honest conversations. So once we'd set up this governance structure, we began to develop an AI policy for staff use. The AI policy is grounded in Arts Council England's corporate values. We care, we learn, we are ambitious. An important foundation which aligns the policy with the existing operating context. Empowering individual staff and the organisation to apply existing knowledge and practice as a foundation for the responsible engagement with AI was a key strategic position. As such, the policy also aligns with the Nolan principles of public life: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership, alongside legal compliance, namely UK GDPR. We wanted to drive engagement and confidence with the aim of creating a policy that would proactively support staff and help them recognise transferable skills, knowledge, and practices that they can apply to their engagement with these technologies. There was nuance around use cases. For some, the question of appropriateness was a legal judgment. For others, it was a values-based judgment. However, one area of operational practice, grant-making process, stood out as a value-based red line. Staff felt really strongly that the work of assessment and decision-making grant-making required expert skill and human nuance, and should at this time not be assisted by generative AI technologies. It was also the area which staff asked for the organisation to take a public position as they were fielding questions from the sector regarding this. And more on that later. The second core aspect of the policy was around legal compliance. The policy outlines how UK GDPR applies to the use of generative AI platforms. It is descriptive in outlining problematic use cases and directs staff to understand the terms of service before you use any platform. And again, this development process was consultative. The reference group provided 47 comments and recommendations and edits to the draft guidance document. We discussed these comments with staff and embedded changes. This ensured that the guidance spoke to staff with a range of job roles and operating context. We then took the refined guidance document to the AI Oversight Group, our director level discussion group. The Oversight Group provided a really strong steer that, owing to the live risks identified through the staff survey, the document should be policy, not guidance. It should be the official position of how Arts Council England employees can use these technologies, rather than a softer advisory position. At this point, we consulted with union representatives and sought feedback on the proposed policy. Again, this provided an inflection point, and further edits were implemented. The union felt strongly that the section of the policy which comments on environmental responsibility should be brought to the forefront, a position the AI team were happy to support and is now reflected in the policy. We brought this policy to the exec board in February 2025, and after a rigorous discussion, it was approved and adopted, and the team were tasked to move with haste to support organisation-wide adoption of the policy. Alongside the policy, we developed a risk list. This is a living document that sits in parallel to the policy. Whilst the policy is directive in terms of acceptable and non-acceptable use cases, we recognise that not all staff have the skills or knowledge to make assessments about the suitability of AI platforms and their compliance with UK GDPR. As such, we created a risk list, an evolving document that provides analysis by the data governance team and the appropriate use cases for each platform. The platforms on the initial version of the list are those that staff told us via the survey that they're already using. Platforms are color coded, green, amber, red. Analysis of appropriate use of each tool is provided alongside analysis of the platform's compliance with UK GDPR. This became known by the AI team as the "we read the terms of service so you don't have to" list. The AI risk list is not exhaustive and staff can use tools beyond this list. However, in those cases, they need to make sure the tools are GDPR compliant and in line with the staff policy. This provides space for more technically minded staff to be able to use the tools that they need in their own work. I'm going to pass back to Owen at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Una. So the third document that we published was the public statement, and that came out at the end of last month. And again, the need for the statement came through quite strongly from the staff survey because colleagues were either already being asked about whether individuals or organizations can use AI to write applications, or it had been suggested to them that ACE are already using AI to make funding decisions. So because of that, the statement essentially does two things. Firstly, it says that we can't stop people from using AI or AI tools to write applications, but we do point out that there are risks, similar tone or language being one, and what they submit to us is something they're entirely responsible for. And then secondly, we say very, very clearly that we don't use AI in the decision-making process for funding. That the decisions are made by colleagues with experience and expertise to ensure the process is fair and transparent. And I think, it's worth saying again that the statement was again helped enormously by the consultation that Una referenced with our governance groups and other funding bodies or public organizations that were navigating similar questions. Right, next slide, please, Una. So, to help us understand AI's potential uses within Arts Council England, in September 2024, we started 5 pilot projects across various business functions. The pilots were small scale, they required minimal resource or investment, and they operated within a structured test environment. All of the pilots followed a consistent methodology, and that was aligned to the generative AI framework for HM government. And that made sure that the pilots were legally compliant, ethically robust, and delivered in a responsible way. And even though the main objective of the pilots was to just explore the use of these tools rather than to implement business systems, it was an enormously valuable process because it helped develop that kind of robust project methodology that I mentioned. It helped the AI literacy of different teams across Arts Council England. I feel like we became more confident in our IT and data management practices around AI, but we also reinforced, quite a key notion that AI isn't a silver bullet. It relies on good quality data and works best with well-defined and efficient systems and processes. Next slide, please. So, alongside the governance structure and the staff consultation that Una's already spoken about, another really key factor in ensuring the organisation was kept in the loop with the work, as well as making sure staff were being heard, was internal communication, which was crucial. And the Arts Council comms team were amazing in helping us set up all staff meetings to talk about the work. To make sure the progress of the work was being included in staff newsletters. And then Una, myself, and members of the new technologies team, Paul Glinkowski, Carl Stevens, Sinead Burke, Lydia Watkins, all attended, directorate meetings, team meetings, and senior leadership meetings. And, and that was really important because we just wanted people to know that the development of AI policies and practices at Arts Council England, was a collaborative effort, that it was proactive and that it was also values led. And I think the final part of that internal comms piece was just making sure that there was a very clear and comprehensive section on our intranet that held all of the documents and information relating to the project as a whole, so that staff could find out more about it wherever they wanted to. Next slide, please. And I think following closely on that point of the AI work being collaborative. At ACE, we've also set up a triaging group, and that includes representatives from different teams. And by sending emails to a specific address at ACE, staff members can ask questions, feedback on the policy, ask about tools, anything they want, basically. And the types of questions being fielded by that group at the moment, is very varied. It ranges from the suitability and GDPR compliance of AI tools to reflections on dealing with funding applications that have been written using AI tools, and as well as supporting the implementation and evolution of the AI policy, the inbox and that team, provide an important data set for policy and resource development. Okay, Una, next slide. So some reflections, and I think in terms of final reflections, for me at least, I actually think it's difficult to get it all into one slide because there are so much, there really is so many. And the obvious thing to say is that the AI project was shaped by extensive consultation and reflection to build a strong evidence base and a really engaging dialogue. It involved cross-organizational collaboration, which ended up laying a really solid groundwork for broader AI adoption within Arts Council England. And because of that consultation, I just keep coming back to a belief that an AI policy isn't a technical document or an IT document or a technical task, but I think it's one that needs to hear from the organization as a whole, to represent those thoughts and feelings and to represent the company's values. And I think the reason why that's important is because, as that bottom paragraph states, I don't think there are any really kind of right answers. AI is already here. It's already being used by our employees and the sector. So what we're trying to do, is develop an ongoing conversation that's rooted in our values, but also learns from our peers, staff, and those that we serve in the creative and cultural sector. And I think that ultimately is what those documents have tried to do. Una, I think you're on mute.
Am I back? I think I'm back. Yeah, it's cool. We're nearly at the end, and only one of us has been on mute, so that's quite good going. Yeah, so I mentioned at the start this new report we put out yesterday, Responsible AI and Practice, the Journal of Art, Journey of Arts Council England. Alongside that, we've also developed a series of resources that we hope will support others who are beginning to develop their internal approach to policies and practices around AI. While we were developing this work in terms of the wider AI strategy work, we found peer organisations to be really supportive, and we really wanted to be as generous with our learning. So these are a series of tools or worksheets designed to help other public sector organisations, but also cultural organisations who are beginning to develop their own policies and practices around the use of AI technologies. I think we'd say there's no one size fits all policy, but these tools are designed to help you develop appropriate policies and practices for your distinct operating context. They're free to use, openly available on the Arts Council website. And yeah, as the kids say, please like and share. We hope they'll be really useful for a really wide range of different organizations, both public sector, cultural sector, but I think also values-led organizations. And they're really practical tools that I think break down this wider, complicated strategy process into much smaller, bite-sized pieces that hopefully make this type of work feel more achievable in your organization. Um, And so you can see here just kind of some snippets of what these worksheets look like. And they're really designed to be walkthroughs or step-by-step guides of how to approach different aspects of developing an AI strategy and an AI policy for your organization. And so with that, I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to pass back over to Kay.
Wow, thank you, Una and Owen. That was really, really informative and so interesting to see. Thank you so much for that and for sharing all those resources. I've seen some questions in the chat where people have asked, oh, please, can you have a link for all those resources? Those are coming. So, yes, um, that's so appreciated. Okay, so I wanted to start off with a question first. I know that a lot of the people who are attending this webinar are from the arts sector, and I know that there are also people here who are not from the arts sector who are sort of embarking on a similar journey of trying to come up with responsible AI policy for their own organization. So I want to start with a question that I think probably applies to everyone, which is I just was so impressed with what you talked about when you were talking about setting up your working group, where you said that you intentionally sort of solicited a range of opinions and you intentionally chose, you reached out to people who were very AI skeptical and created this hierarchy-free space. And it triggered a thought in my mind, which is that a lot of the challenges around implementing AI, especially trying to do it ethically, are really human challenges because the technology is there, but it's like how to do this in a way that works in the human world. So I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about, what kind of role do you think is best suited to doing this? I know you were brought in on this fellowship, which seems like it was an absolutely fantastic opportunity. What would you recommend to other organizations in terms of the type of person who can take the lead on this, the type of skills that are needed to do this, and what kind of organizational culture do you think you need to have, sort of more broadly, to do this?
Yeah, I think, Owen, is that something you want to pick up on? I guess thinking about where this type of role would sit if it wasn't a fellowship at Arts Council.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, as I said in the presentation, I'm not sure the skills required to do this sort of work requires a huge amount of IT or technical skills. You know, it is about consulting and ensuring that an AI policy reflects the values of the organization and what's important to it, and also the diversity of opinions or depth of feeling about this technology. So, in terms of the type of person, I think in the Arts Council, this sort of thing would naturally sit with me and my team. But I don't think it necessarily needed to be. I think someone who understands those basic principles and understands kind of how important it is to make sure that the organization is heard when putting together in a to make sure that an organization is heard in an AI policy is just as important a skill as someone who has either some experience or a kind of a natural affinity with the tech side. And then in terms of culture, I think. Uh, I think with any sort of policy or with any kind of transformation, however big or small that is, it always helps and is probably essential that the top level of the organization are bought in and understand why you're doing it, and you have both that space, kind of an air cover to get on with it, and a bit of latitude and agency to try things out. And I think we've been very lucky at the Arts Council that the executive board um, and the executive director for enterprise and innovation, Tonya Nelson, has been incredibly supportive and allowed us to get on with it, but also clear the way for the work that we've been doing in the organization. And I think that top level buy-in and that curiosity around the technology, coupled with there being two very important questions for the Arts Council and the cultural sector around AI, which is IP and environmental responsibility. All of that kind of helped the work that Una's done and my team have done with this work.
Yeah. And I think I'd also add having the data that says this is a current situation was really decisive, I think, for exec board. I think there's a lot of hype around AI at the minute. There's a lot of kind of feeling that this is a future technology or it's not really that relevant. But I think you'd struggle to find an organization where staff aren't using these technologies. Um, and having that evidence, having that data, like one of the things that we did from that survey was we asked people, what tools are you using? So we had this really long list of tools, platforms that people were using. And again, that made exec board go, okay, this is here. We need a policy and we need it quick. And I think having that baseline data really opened a lot of doors for us. And I think, obviously I'm external to the Arts Council and I've only been working with them for about a year, but I think the general sense is that the AI policy has moved quicker than maybe other things have. And I think having that evidence base of the need for this work, both in terms of legal compliance, but also I think reputational risk, really kind of focus minds to get this work done.
That's a really interesting lead into another question I was going to ask because when we talk about data ethics and organizations sort of developing any kind of data ethics policy, we often talk about four areas of risk. So, sort of legal and compliance risk, reputational risk, ethical risk, and commercial risk. And I think obviously you've identified those were the ones that were really important to Arts Council. I would imagine that for other organizations, it might have been a different pathway towards, getting that top level buy-in. What was my next question? So we've had, I think this actually leads me to Hannah's question from the Q&A. She said, can you share any examples of anyone bringing major barriers that you were able to identify solutions to addressing?
Una, I'm kind of I'm trying to consider that question on two levels. The first level being, were there any obstacles in us getting the policy, moving forward and making progress on the policy, and then secondly, in a more granular fashion
Mm,
around the AI pilots and the use of it. And that's
yeah.
how I'm kind of processing that question. I don't know if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, I think like one of the things with my role, Arts Council weren't paying for my role. It was funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. And so that gave me the capacity to dedicate my time to this project, but it also meant that I didn't have Arts Council deliverables in the way that other people in the project team did. And so I think I was able to prevent or offset any obstacles before they became a thing. And so I feel like at this point, I've spoke to every single person in the organization. I've sat in every single possible meeting and forum in the organization, so that as soon as somebody kind of raised their head and went, "Oh, what about this?" I was able to engage with that as a one-to-one conversation before it became a thing. And I think we've had some really interesting conversations about, digital transformation is about people, not projects. And to have a dedicated person to facilitate the development of this policy from a values-led and legal compliance perspective is quite unique. Public sector organizations are very stretched, they're very busy. Um, I don't know the Arts Council would have invested in this role had AHRC not paid for it. But I think having been through this process now, the value of having this role, having a dedicated person, and also that semi-external position. So I'm embedded within the organisation, but I'm also still directly employed by Goldsmiths, not Arts Council. Um, Provided that kind of third space to really broker those difficult conversations. And yet one of the things, for I said was, especially the AI skeptics, I'm not trying to convince you AI is good. There's lots of bad stuff about it. But when I leave here, if you can have a really reasoned and evidence-based discussion about why you find it challenging, then I've won. So it wasn't about telling people AI is good, but it was, environmental responsibility colleagues saying it's bad, moving them beyond it's bad to being able to express why it's bad and how you might mitigate that, or where that might shift the organization's values. That felt like a really important conversation to have. But yeah, so I think talking to people has been extremely useful in terms of stopping things from becoming blockers along the way.
Yeah, and I'd echo that. I would say, having someone external be a figurehead for the work inside the Arts Council was enormously valuable, and that doesn't even touch upon the enormous amount of credibility that Una brings with her as she's doing this work in the Arts Council. So as I said, I think that was definitely valuable in clearing the way and allowing people to understand, okay, we have Una's got this incredible experience. She's going to help us get or kind of work through all of this, and that was enormously valuable. But then off the back of that too, I think what we had and had since, as I said, since the launch of ChatGPT 3 was lots of people in the sector talking about AI and also asking questions around IP and environmental responsibility and how it could be used creatively, etc., which most of the organization was hearing or directly fielding questions about. So then, with the groundswell of interest outside the organization and inside the organization, as well as Una's presence at ACE, that I think all of that helped just clear the way and allowed everyone to think that this is something that we need to move forward with relatively quickly rather than not.
Makes sense. I'm just looking at all the questions. We've got so many questions that I suspect we're not going to get through all of them. So I'm going to pick some highlights, but I'm wondering, Una and Owen, if you might be willing to follow up with some of these after the fact, if we can find a way to share this with participants. So if your question doesn't get addressed now, hopefully find a way to do it after the fact. All right. So my next question, we've had some interesting questions related to compliance. So obviously, GDPR compliance is key. And one question asked, have you considered, has ACE considered the possibility of using locally hosted AI tools just to enable better data protection and to reduce energy usage, or potentially at least just track energy usage?
Shall I start, Una?
Go for it.
Okay, so I think the short answer is not yet. All of the work, what I should have done, or what we should have said, and if it wasn't clear, forgive me, but I think one of the people who played a key role in all of this work was Nick Carter, who's our data governance person inside the organization. So all of the assessments around the tools on the risk list, all of the work around the pilots, all of the questions that we get via the AI email address that are addressed to the triaging group all have Nick Carter as playing a pretty central role in all of it. So almost everything that we do, and certainly all of the practical stuff, is assessed through a GDPR lens. And that obviously was one of the key criterion for the risk list that we put together. So we haven't got to a point where we're looking at kind of locally hosted models yet. But I think what we've done so far in terms of the documents, but particularly the risk list and our thinking around this, is still pretty nascent. And what we've done is put a line in the sand to allow us to, keep having that conversation and evolve the policies on, a number of different fronts, whether that is on a guidance or policy level or a more practical level like that.
This actually leads right into the next question, which is, did any of the pilots involve analyzing personally identifying information? It sounds like maybe they did. And if so, how did you manage it? For example, the basis for collecting the data, consent, managing the data, etc.
Yeah, none of the pilots evolved into any kind of business solution that is being used in a live environment that use personally identifiable data. So we didn't have to wrestle with that. But I think one of the key considerations and one of the things that we did work on as we were putting together the pilots was to just kind of make sure that in a pilot that might use personally identifiable information, how we were going to manage it, if it was to develop, but they haven't, and we have no plans to do that either.
Yeah. And I think the pilots and I think the policy work very much was about upskilling the organization alongside kind of developing, delivering a policy. Um, and I don't think we did say that, but the oversight group, the responsible AI group, they were also seen as mechanisms for driving the digital literacy, the AI literacy across the organization. And so the pilots were deliberately designed to be quite low risk because they were essentially research and development projects. They were carried out in a test environment. But what that has done is it's given the organization more confidence to do more ambitious work going forward. But I think it's also given the organization the confidence in terms of procuring services. So to be more critical in terms of future partnerships or future research and development work. So I think we deliberately took quite a safe approach, kind of slow and steady progress. And again, the funding for this role allowed us to do foundational work. I think everybody on this call knows that if you want money to do digital, if you want money to do AI, you need something that's cool that can have a launch party. And this kind of project, because of the way it was funded, it was not about a launch party. It wasn't about, announcing a shiny product. It was a process-focused research and development process. But the value of that is creating skills and a really strong organizational research and development culture that can support future projects that may be shiny, but will be ethical, responsible, and values led alongside exciting and kind of press release whirly.
And okay, if you don't mind, and I think just to jump on the point that Una made around the literacy piece, I think what was really valuable with the pilots was that the business teams that were involved in them, began to understand, where the potential uses might be because, there are definitely situations, as we said, AI isn't a silver bullet, and there are situations where it works best and situations where it doesn't work at all. And I think what those pilots allowed us to do was to understand that a little more so that any conversations around the use of AI, either internally or us talking to externals, is is a better conversation based on some experience rather than um, kind of some big ideas of what the potential of AI is without really understanding what it actually can do.
Absolutely. My next question is probably the stickiest one. I'm gonna choose Andy's because he sort of phrased it very succinctly here. How do you balance innovation with the protection of artistic integrity when AI tools are used in creative processes? So this is one of the other questions actually asked when you were thinking about compliance. Obviously you had to focus on GDPR because that's mandatory. But what about other laws like IP and copyright? I'm sort of suspecting that maybe this is an area where ethics has to come sooner than law because the law is still catching up. But I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on these points.
Yeah. Do you want me to kick off, Owen, or do you want to jump in?
Yeah, have a go.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, sticky question, but one we've discussed a lot over the last year, so not a new question. So what I would say is when it comes to thinking about AI and artists, there is a lot of discussion at the minute around IP, and it's a really, really important piece of policy work that's happening in the UK. But there is also this parallel conversation, which is that artists have always engaged with new technologies. And so Arts Council was funding artists who were using these technologies before ChatGPT became a thing, before anyone really knew what AI was. So one of the things that we quite often come back to is, but is this an AI question? And so there are a significant amount of creative practitioners doing really interesting work, which might range from building their own data sets, building their own models, developing products or developing new creative practices. Um, there's a really interesting range of creative practitioners in the UK who are engaging with the technologies or engaging with the narratives of the technologies and the impact that they're having on society. So there's a range of creative practitioners already using these technologies. It's not exclusively a case that AI is bad for arts and artists don't like AI technologies because of the IP issues. And it's this kind of challenge where these two things can be true at once. IP is problematic and bad for artists and creative practitioners when it comes to the training data. But on the other hand, artists are engaging and using these technologies in creative ways. And so in trying to serve in that sector support in that sector development role, Arts Council is positioned somewhere in the middle where it's supporting both of those schools of thought through both policy and practice. And so that's kind of one way that we've been thinking about that is that yes, there's challenges and problems, but we also have a significant part of the sector that is engaging in and using these tools.
And Kay, the other thing that I'd add is at the start of the presentation there were three areas that we felt that we needed to make some progress on. The first was the internal, the second was how we help the sector navigate the opportunities and challenges, and the third was how we influence policy. And on that third piece, one of the big things that we did fairly recently was respond, in some detail to the government consultation on AI and copyright. So that issue, is very, very important to the Arts Council and to the sector, and it's one that we've been wrestling with probably since November 2022. And as Una says, it's like it is a bit of a balance, but the kind of the copyright question is really important, and us getting Arts Council's view into that consultation was also a very, very important and key part of the work that we've been doing over the last 12 months too.
Those are some really insightful answers. Thank you. I want to ask some questions people have focused on now that are a little more sort of operational, maybe. So, um, we had a question about whether there's any initiative to create sector capacity to offer support to organizations that don't have these resources to start working with AI in this way. So is Arts Council England like reaching out, aside from sharing these publications, have you got any other sort of initiatives planned on that?
Shall I start?
Go for
Um,
it.
okay, so on that second area, how Arts Council helps the sector navigate the opportunities and challenges. Una's kind of next kind of piece of work and her focus is in that area. So we're enormously looking forward to kind of what comes back. But I think as a starting point, I think the documents that were released today to just document and be open about our process are there, but we know there's plenty to do, and we'll be kind of working on that once we get a bit more information and see owners work and talking to staff members, the sector, and other stakeholders.
Excellent. And we might have time for one or two more questions. Um, Circling back to the objections that some within Arts Council England might have had around AI, was there any concern about job insecurity? Did that come up of like this could be taking our jobs? Did you need to address and allay any concerns about that?
Yeah, so I think I'll jump in. I think one of my benefits of not being Arts Council employed is I can have opinions, which Owen always enjoys. Um, because this wasn't funded by Arts Council, it meant that I could clearly state that this was not a consultancy takeover to do redundancies. And so, one of the things I think that really helped us drive this through was this is a proactive piece of work. It is not a reactive piece of work. And so we engaged with the union, we had these conversations. And again, because of the way the role was funded, one of the things I said to the union was, if I can give you the digital literacy so that you can establish why you shouldn't be replaced by AI, then my job here is done. So actually being able to drive that digital literacy and do this in a proactive way when it's not about efficiency savings, it's not about a restructure, like that's quite rare. Like quite often these things are tarnished with bad process. So the funding of this role allowed me to probably be a bit more political and opinionated internally, but also to say, like, this isn't about some kind of dark arts consultancy takeover. This is a nice arts and humanities research project to think about values, but also to give you the digital literacy skills to know where these technologies might support your work, but also to know where you're probably being sold snake oil that is not quite as good as your staff. And so I think that again, that kind of being funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, being funded by Braid, really positioned this work in quite a friendly, progressive, proactive way. And I think that for me was a real luxury. It's very rare that you get to build something up. Like quite often, digital transformation is retrospective. You're trying to fix things that don't quite work. You're going into organizations that are in challenging situations. So I think this was a rare luxury of a project for me. And I think that really helped to shift attitudes internally as well.
And I also think the proof was in the pudding because given Una's status as someone who'd come into the Arts Council, you know, we spoke and consulted with everyone. None of the hard questions were dodged, and we tried to hear and listen and reflect all of that in the policy. And that's what I mean about the proof in the pudding, because the policy that ended up coming out of this process was not and is not a process that's trying to get everyone from the Arts Council onto AI. It's a policy that states very clearly that actually these are the things that you need to consider before you start using AI, and these are the areas where you might want to think about using it, but these are areas where you probably or shouldn't or can't. So the policy was neither trying to stop it nor encourage people to do it, and that was based off the consultation and us fielding those questions and listening and reflecting that back in the policy that came out. And I think, when we talk about policies needing to reflect the organization's values and the different opinions of staff and the depth of feeling, then that's sort of what I mean.
That is so interesting to hear. I think we're at the end of the questions that we have time for. Unfortunately, we could probably talk about this for a whole nother hour. We have that many questions. So we will try and follow up with these questions if possible afterwards. One thing I wanted to mention before we go is at the ODI, we've just developed a new course, which is all about how to harness the power of generative AI in a productive way in the workplace while making sure that you do it ethically. It's really aimed at probably mostly decision makers and leaders, people from a non-technical background, so that they can learn about which models are good at what types of things. They can experiment. We've got a little thing, a tool that people can try their own models that they sort of can train on certain documents. Like I saw there was a question in the chat about RAG models and sort of what are they good for versus other ones like ChatGPT. So I think Joe is going to share the link if anybody's interested in just upskilling themselves a little bit in the strategic use of these things, not so much the technical background, but just enough that you can understand how you can implement these things. That's a course that we will be running. I also want to share with you a link to our next webinars. So we've got one coming up in at the 1st of August, which is about AI governance in a global development context. So that'll be Nadine Damaschk from GIZ, the German International Development Agency, talking about how they do AI governance. And then we've also got one coming up about personal data security and dark patterns. That'll be our next one in September. That's from the head of data protection in the Philippines National Bank. So those are two of our other data ethics professionals who've gone on to take this work into their workplace, and they'll share with us what they've learned. So please feel free to sign up for those. They're always free. You can keep in touch and join our email newsletter. And if you are interested in becoming a certified data ethics professional, so that you, like Oonagh, will be well positioned to lead this type of thing in your organization. Our next cohort starts sort of mid-September, and we've still got some places if that's something you want to sign up for. So on that note, I just want to say thank you so much, Oonagh and Owen. It's been so insightful. I think everybody's got so much out of this. We really appreciate your joining us. And thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us today as well.